There will come a moment in your life when someone will insult you, not behind your back, but directly to your face. They will test your dignity, your emotional strength, and your ability to stay calm in chaos. At that very moment, what you do will define the kind of person you are becoming. Most people react, but few people respond. This speech will teach you how to be among those few. Stay till the end, because what you'll discover here is not just how to deal with disrespect, but how to rise above it. Loneliness doesn't begin at 80. It builds slowly, almost silently over the years. It rarely arrives with a loud knock. Instead, it creeps in quietly, taking root in the unnoticed moments of life. A skipped phone call here, a declined invitation there. The once vibrant gatherings with friends become fewer. The laughter that once echoed in the house fades. People grow busy, move on, or pass away. One day, you wake up, and though the world continues to turn, you feel like it's moving without you. This is not something that suddenly switches on in old age. It starts much earlier. In your 30s, you lose touch with old friends. In your 40s, you focus on work and family, and forget to nourish your own soul. In your 50s, your children grow up and leave, and by 60, you start to notice how rare deep conversation has become. By the time 80 arrives, the silence isn't new, it's just louder. Loneliness is a process of emotional erosion. It doesn't happen because someone is old. It happens because emotional connections were not maintained when they should have been. It's like a plant that didn't get water for years. By the time the leaves fall, the roots have already dried. We often think loneliness is only about being physically alone, but it runs deeper than that. You can be surrounded by people and still feel invisible. You can be in a crowd and still feel like your heart is standing in an empty room. It begins when we stop expressing what we feel because we think no one has the time to listen. It begins when we choose silence over vulnerability because opening up feels like a burden to others. And with each time we suppress that need for connection, a small part of us retreats. Over time, that space grows. And by the time we realize how much we crave presence, we're not even sure how to ask for it anymore. People often wonder why elderly individuals feel so disconnected, but very few look at the lifelong patterns that led to it. The truth is, the habits we form today, ignoring calls, skipping visits, choosing screens over conversations, are laying the foundation for how emotionally full or empty our later years will be. The friendships we don't nurture today become the silence we endure tomorrow. Loneliness is not the result of age, it's the result of a slow disconnection from people, from purpose, and from being truly seen. The saddest part is that by the time people finally start noticing the loneliness in someone's life, it has already settled in like a second skin. And what hurts even more is realizing that it was preventable if only more people noticed the signs earlier. If only we reached out more often, spoke more honestly, and stayed more present. Because loneliness isn't an 80-year-old problem, it's a lifelong accumulation of unspoken goodbyes, unasked questions, and unread emotions. Loneliness doesn't begin at 80. It builds slowly, one unnoticed moment at a time. It isn't something that strikes suddenly in old age, like a storm that arrives without warning. It's something that accumulates, almost invisibly, across decades. It starts when you begin to feel that fewer people truly understand you. It deepens when your calls go unanswered, or when you stop reaching out because you've been disappointed too many times. Friendships drift apart not with anger, but with silence. The invitations stop coming. Or maybe you begin saying no more often, telling yourself you're just tired. But in truth, you're just not sure where you belong anymore. As time goes on, responsibilities pile up. Careers, family, bills, and slowly, connection becomes a luxury instead of a need. People get used to being emotionally self-sufficient, convincing themselves they don't need others. But the truth is, we all do. The need doesn't disappear, it just hides. And when it isn't fed for long enough, it turns into a deep emptiness that's hard to name. That's loneliness, and it doesn't knock on the door at 8. It's been sitting there for years, growing stronger with every moment of unspoken sadness, every story left untold, every emotion bottled up. You might feel it when you're scrolling through your phone and realize you have contacts but no one to really talk to. Or when you're surrounded by people and still feel strangely alone. That's the kind of loneliness that builds over time, quiet and unnoticed but powerful. It doesn't ask for attention until it's already taken hold. You might try to distract yourself from it with noise, with television, with work, with routine. But when you're finally alone with your thoughts, when there's nothing left to keep your mind busy, that's when you feel it most. What's so tragic about this kind of loneliness is that it's preventable, but only if we recognize it early, when we still have time to turn things around, when we still have the chance to call a friend, to apologize, to open up, to reconnect. It requires intention. It requires effort. Because the relationships that keep us alive emotionally are not self-sustaining. They need maintenance. And when we stop tending to them, they wither, even if no one notices right away. By the time someone reaches 80, their circle may be smaller, their home quieter, their days slower, but the loneliness they feel in those years is not new. It is the final shape of a silence that began long before, the conversations never had, the love never spoken, the moments never shared. And so the sadness of loneliness in old age is not just about the present, it's a reflection of the past, of all the connections that were lost slowly, until one day there was no one left to talk to. Loneliness doesn't begin at 80. It builds slowly, like dust collecting in the corners of a room you stop noticing. It doesn't arrive with a sudden emptiness, but grows gradually through subtle shifts in life that seem harmless at first. You tell yourself you're just busy, that friends will understand if you cancel, that family will be there later. But later becomes a habit, and habits become distance. People drift, not because of anger, and with every missed moment of connection, the feeling of isolation grows deeper. You begin to realize that your phone rings less, messages become fewer, shorter, more formal. Conversations that used to last hours now barely touch the surface. Even when you're surrounded by people, something feels off, like you're there physically, but emotionally miles away. You start to speak less about how you truly feel, because you're not sure anyone would really understand or even care. And so instead of risking rejection or misunderstanding, you keep your thoughts to yourself. That's how the loneliness builds, quietly, subtly, and slowly. You may have laughed often, smiled around others, but deep inside, something started to ache. Not for attention, but for presence, for someone who really sees you, listens without distraction, responds without rushing. The truth is, loneliness is less about being alone and more about being unseen. You can sit in a house full of noise and still feel isolated if no one notices what's going on inside you. Over the years, you learn to carry that silence, to get used to it. You begin filling your time with routine, with work, with small tasks, anything to keep the feeling at bay. But late at night, or during quiet mornings, it returns, that lingering question, does anyone really know me anymore? It's easy to assume this only happens when you grow old, but that's just when it becomes visible. In reality, it started far earlier, when connections weren't prioritized, when vulnerability was avoided, when technology replaced presence, when real conversations became rare. The people we love fade from our daily lives not because they stop loving us, but because life gets in the way, and we stop fighting to stay close. We let go without meaning to, and the result is a slow erosion of belonging. By the time someone reaches 80, loneliness may seem like a product of age, but it's actually the product of years spent without nourishing meaningful bonds. It's not just about the people who are no longer around, it's about the moments that were missed when they were. It's not a sudden storm that takes over your life, it's a quiet snowfall that gathers over years until you wake up one day and realize how cold it's become. Loneliness doesn't begin at 80, it builds slowly, hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. It doesn't wait for old age to strike. It starts much earlier, often without us even noticing. It begins when we start choosing convenience over connection, when we stop calling someone just to talk, when we scroll through social media instead of having real conversations. At first, it feels like nothing. You think you're just busy, tired, overwhelmed. But little by little, the warmth of human closeness fades. The people you once spoke to daily become voices you only hear on birthdays or by accident. Relationships you once relied on become distant memories, and yet the world keeps moving, so you convince yourself that this is just how life works. You keep going, distracted by responsibilities, unaware that something essential is slowly slipping away. As the years pass, you begin to feel the weight of the silence that surrounds you. Not the silence of a quiet room, but the silence of being emotionally disconnected. You may laugh at a friend's message, post pictures online, even attend social gatherings, but still feel empty inside. It's because loneliness doesn't always look like isolation. Sometimes it wears the mask of productivity, busyness, or even success. But underneath all of it, there's a quiet yearning to be truly understood, to be deeply seen. That yearning doesn't appear when you're old, it's always been there, buried under layers of avoidance and distraction. What makes this kind of loneliness dangerous is that it tricks you into thinking you're fine. You get used to the surface-level interactions, the routine check-ins, the polite smiles. You accept them as substitutes for real connection. Over time, your ability to open up fades. You stop sharing your inner world because you believe no one really has the time to care. You tell yourself you're strong, that you don't need anyone. But strength isn't about shutting people out. It's about letting the right ones in. And when you stop doing that, you start shrinking inward. By the time someone reaches 80, they may be surrounded by silence, but that silence didn't come overnight. It was built day by day, year by year, through forgotten friendships, missed conversations, and suppressed feelings. The old man sitting alone in his room wasn't always alone. Once he had people, he had laughter, he had connection, but over time it faded, not because no one cared, but because no one noticed the slow disappearance of closeness. That's the tragedy of loneliness. It doesn't ask for permission to grow, it simply grows wherever attention is lacking. If we truly understood how loneliness builds, we'd treat our relationships like lifelines. We'd speak more honestly, listen more deeply, and show up more consistently. Because the emotional isolation we fear in old age doesn't start in the body, it starts in the heart, long before the world calls us old. Loneliness doesn't begin at 80, it builds slowly, shaped by a series of choices and patterns that often go unnoticed in the moment. It's not something that suddenly appears in old age like a surprise visitor. It's something that begins to take form quietly in the background of everyday life. It starts when we choose silence over expression, when we convince ourselves we're too busy to call, too tired to visit, or too emotionally drained to be vulnerable. Each time we say maybe next time, each moment we dismiss the need for connection, we place another brick in the wall that will eventually separate us from the world around us. This slow construction of emotional distance can begin as early as our 20s or 30s, when ambition and responsibility begin to take over. We prioritize careers, schedules, goals, and in the process, relationships get placed on hold. We tell ourselves that we'll reconnect later, that our real friends will still be there when things slow down. But time doesn't wait, and people move on. Those tiny, seemingly insignificant gaps in communication widen with each passing year. Eventually, the people we once knew deeply become strangers, not because of conflict, but because we stop nurturing the bond. By midlife, loneliness is already taking shape. You can feel it in the quiet of a dinner table with fewer conversations. You can feel it in the way old photos stir a sense of longing you can't quite explain. It appears not just in the absence of people, but in the absence of meaningful presence. And as we grow older, those missing connections begin to weigh heavier. The problem is, by the time most people reach the later stages of life, they've become so accustomed to the distance that they no longer know how to close it. It's not that they don't want company, it's that they don't know how to ask for it anymore. They fear becoming a burden, or being met with disinterest. Loneliness is not a switch that flips when someone turns 80. It is the result of decades of unattended emotional needs, of postponed conversations, of friendships that faded without farewell. It is the echo of all the times we convinced ourselves that we were fine being alone, even when we weren't. And the deeper tragedy is that by the time many realize they are truly lonely, the opportunity to rebuild what was lost feels impossibly far away. If we recognized the slow growth of loneliness earlier, if we treated our connections as living, breathing parts of our emotional health, we might approach life differently. We might call more often, listen more carefully, and speak more honestly, because the greatest mistake is believing that loneliness is a result of aging, when in fact it is often the consequence of all the chances we didn't take to stay close while we still could. Loneliness doesn't begin at 80, it builds slowly, through a quiet sequence of emotional neglect and missed opportunities that accumulate over time. It's not the kind of thing that shows up with a warning or announces itself with urgency. Instead, it lingers in the background, unnoticed and underestimated. It begins with small shifts: the friend you stopped calling, the gathering you skipped, the emotion you kept to yourself because it felt safer not to be vulnerable. In those moments, you don't feel lonely, you feel occupied, independent, maybe even proud of being able to manage life on your own. But what you don't see is how connection is slowly being eroded by silence, by distance, by assumptions that people will always be there when you need them. The truth is, they won't always be. As the years pass, those missed moments compound. You begin to notice that fewer people ask how you're doing, not because they don't care, but because you've taught them not to ask. You've shown them that you're okay on your own, even when you weren't. The loneliness builds not from being forgotten, but from slowly stepping back without realizing how far you've drifted. You become the one who doesn't reach out, the one who doesn't share much anymore, the one who answers, "I'm fine," out of habit rather than truth. And slowly, others stop asking. By the time someone is in their later years, the silence they live with isn't new, it's just become more obvious. Their days are quieter, their social circles smaller, their conversations shorter, but that didn't start at 80. It began when they were 40, 50, 60. It began when people stopped prioritizing connection, when emotional expression was replaced with self-sufficiency. They may look back and wonder when it happened, but the answer isn't a single moment. It was 1,000 tiny moments when they chose to close off instead of open up. Loneliness is often misunderstood as something caused by age or circumstance, but in most cases it is built by habits of disconnection, by the belief that needing others is a weakness, and by the fear of reaching out first. We underestimate how much our emotional well-being depends on simple, consistent human contact. The text messages we don't send, the apologies we hold back, the feelings we bury, these are the bricks that slowly build the walls of loneliness. What we feel at 80 is not the beginning of isolation, but the result of a life lived without regular emotional maintenance. And while some might see that as inevitable, it isn't. The future is shaped by what we choose now. If we want connection in our later years, we must build it daily by being present, by listening, by speaking truthfully, and by choosing, again and again, not to let silence grow where conversation once lived. Loneliness doesn't suddenly appear in old age. It's the silent result of years of emotional distance, neglected connections, and unspoken feelings. It grows slowly, shaped by habits of avoidance and the belief that independence means isolation. By the time it becomes visible, it has already taken root deeply. The truth is, loneliness is not just an issue of age, it's a consequence of the choices we make throughout life. If we want connection in our later years, we must protect and nurture our relationships now. A simple call, a shared moment, or an honest conversation can be powerful acts of prevention. Because in the end, it's not about how many people are around us, it's about how deeply we've allowed ourselves to stay connected. Let us not wait until 80 to realize the value of presence, warmth, and companionship. The time to build a connected life is not later, it is now.